So, when was the year of the Linux desktop, or when will that year be? Well, for me, I think that was probably around 2011. Um, but I've been using it a lot longer than that, probably more like since 2001. But yeah, a lot of people think that the year of the Linux desktop hasn't come yet, or that Linux isn't really ready for the desktop. So when will Linux be ready for the desktop? People seem to think it just isn't user friendly enough, or it can't do the things that your average user would want, and that it's only for power users or extremely skilled technical people. But all of these ideas are basically wrong. So the year of the Linux desktop, for me specifically, was 2011 when I mean, I've been using it on and off since 2001, but 2011, around there, I made Linux basically my primary system. I've still had a secondary box running Windows. I still have that today, and I also have a box running Mac OS. I switch between the three operating systems on a daily basis, but primarily I just use Linux for everything by default, and it works. I actually find it to be the most convenient for desktop use. I mean, obviously it dominates for server use. Nothing can really compete with it on the server, but for desktop use, I find it to be the most efficient and easy to work with system out of pretty much anything, including Windows and Mac OS. Mac OS is a little bit more slick and smooth, but it's slightly more polished, but it just doesn't behave the way I'd like it to, and Linux on the desktop does. Of course, that all depends on what desktop you're using. Here you'll notice I'm running KDE, and it's amazing. It didn't quite look right when I first installed it, but basically, install KDE. Get it tweaked and get the right themes in place, and it looks beautiful. Configuring everything to work the way you want, and it's great. So for me, that fits my needs. But for other people might have other needs, and a lot of people are of the mistaken belief that the reason Linux has not taken off on the desktop is because it doesn't fit the needs of regular users, but it actually does. And you might not believe me, but it actually does. So your average non-technical user, many people would probably not even notice that they are running Linux. If you were to give them a Linux-based system, so long as they can recognize the Chrome icon, unless they're looking for an Internet Explorer icon, or a normal non-technical user will just see they'll see their Chrome icon, and they know that's what they click on to get to the internet. They wouldn't, a really non-technical user probably wouldn't even be aware that there are different browsers, or what a browser even is. And even for a technical user, even for, like, say, myself, using the browser, like if you do most of your work, I know a lot of people are Firefox fans and stuff like that, but if you do most of your work in the browser, or you spend a lot of time in the browser, you generally, at least I haven't noticed a difference. I can seamlessly work between, whether it be Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. It really makes zero difference. The browser behaves pretty much identically, and you wouldn't even know you're on one system versus the other, especially if you're using cloud-based things like Google Docs. I can create a document on one and seamlessly just go over to another system, and they may as well be the same OS for those purposes. The only place where it really gets different is when you're running actual applications on the local system, and that's where it's different. So your average user who just needs to get on the internet won't know the difference. I barely know the difference. I could forget what OS I'm running. If you're only working with a browser doing things on the web, it's easy to just forget that you're even using Linux. You could just as well be using anything else. But yeah, so your choice of desktop will make a difference. For me right now, I've jumped around a lot, but right now KDE is really fit. It's really meeting my needs, and it's amazing. For your average user, even your average non-technical user, they're generally going to be fine with something like you could just stick with the default GNOME. So right now I'm actually running Ubuntu, and For I have my reasons. I just prefer a Debian based distro, and I prefer having the extra, proprietary software that comes with Ubuntu. So I feel like it's the most stable and practical distro for myself. A lot of people like Arch and Manjaro and Arch based distros, and there's a ton of distros out these days, and a lot of people have other preferences. A lot of people like to knock Ubuntu, but personally, I kind of prefer Ubuntu at the moment. But running Ubuntu with KDE is pretty amazing. But you could just stick with the default GNOME that it comes with these days, and it'll work just fine. It would actually work just fine for me as well, but I kind of just prefer KDE at the moment. So your average non-technical user can do most of the things that they would want. You can run, and they, depending on how non-technical they are, they may not even notice that they're not running Microsoft Office. I mean, these days, I barely use Microsoft Office or any other Office suite except for just Google Docs, so it wouldn't even matter. But you can install LibreOffice incredibly easily. It's actually easier to install LibreOffice on, actually comes with Ubuntu by default, so you don't even have to install it. Whereas with Windows, you would have to buy Office and install it, I believe, unless they're shipping it with like, I'm not even sure how they handle that with licensing these days. But I haven't had to deal with that in a very, very long time. But if anything, it's almost easier in some ways. And most of the things you'll work with are pretty much work pretty seamlessly, and it's pretty stable. So in terms of regular in terms of regular desktop stuff, it works pretty flawlessly. Like here, I'm using, I'm recording my screen with the Voco screen. It has all kinds of, you can do all the normal things you would want, screenshotting. I have the only place where it would really trip someone up is maybe if you're just not used to it. Say if you're a little bit technical and you're just not familiar with Linux, you're going to get tripped up by some of the things that are just different. Kind of how like a Windows user might get tripped up using a Mac. It's not that, or vice versa. It's not that either of those systems are not ready for the desktop. It's just that users are, they just get tripped up because they're not familiar with that specific system. Linux may have, it has a smaller desktop user base than either of the other two major systems. So you might run into, it might be harder to find someone to help you if you have a technical problem and you don't know how to Google it yourself. But other than that, it's pretty smooth sailing. You get this nice intuitive menu. You can search for whatever apps you want. If you want to install software, that's also pretty easy too. So you have this nice little app store, basically like an app store here. It comes with all kinds of great software, torrenting software, money management software. You can install things like, like even right here, you have this Digicam photography software, KDE NLive for video editing. If you want like a Photoshop alternative, you have the GIMP. So you could install the GIMP for photo manipulation and graphical editing. You can also install that on macOS and Windows, which I use it on both. But it's actually easier on Linux. You just install it through this. You can install it through here or through the command line, and you don't have to go to the website and download the application or anything. So in a lot of ways, this is more convenient than other systems. The real reason why Linux has not been adopted on the desktop, it is not because it isn't ready, but because it just isn't being shipped by default on most PCs that are being distributed. Most of the times, it's most new PCs are being sold with Windows, and it's just the default that's out there. A lot of people just take what's installed on the system by default and don't care. They just want a working laptop or a working desktop, and they don't really care what OS is installed. And some people would notice, some people wouldn't. Most people these days are a little bit technical, and they would notice something's a little bit different, but it's not that they couldn't adapt to it. Like you adapt to your newest, newest mobile OS that's installed, and people upgrade their mobile devices all the time and just adapt to new interfaces. So depending on how old you are and how technical you are. So pretty much that's the real reason, is that it just isn't being distributed by default. That's the reason that people don't view Linux as being ready for the desktop, but it very much is ready for the desktop. And it's had great success on mobile devices. Android is Linux, and a lot of people will say, well, it's not real Linux because it's not desktop Linux. It's not running a regular desktop, but it's still Linux. It's still running the Linux kernel. It's a incredibly widely distributed version of Linux. That said, there's also server-based Linux. Linux is running on servers all over the world, and it's like pretty much the most widely used server OS. So, all that considered, what else should we talk about? I think that's mostly it. I don't want to talk about what the best distro is today, or what distro you should choose. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter which distro you pick. I mean, it does. You'll have certain advantages and disadvantages, but you can make any distro look like any other distro. But that's pretty much it for today. Just one topic I've been meaning to cover for a while. There are probably other nuances to it and other things that I could go on and on about. But this is probably about as much time as I should devote to this topic. Maybe I should demonstrate a few things. I'm not sure what besides the fact that, I should point out one thing before I end this video. I should point out that if you do happen to be familiar with Linux, like say for work or something, say if you're a Linux admin, a lot of times, even Unix and Linux admins will still run Windows on their desktop. Not everybody's sold on Linux on the desktop. They'll still run Windows or Mac OS on their desktop, which is fine. Nothing against that. One really convenient thing about running Linux on the desktop, if you are familiar with the command line and you're used to working with servers, you can take all that knowledge that applies to a server, and you can basically use that to get around your desktop. So if you have files, say on your desktop or in your home directory or something, you can use regular Linux commands to find them. So that's incredibly convenient, and you can use like find and grep and do all sorts of and sort things, and you can search for like which file is taking up the most space. You don't need to download a separate app for that. You can download. There are tons of apps you can find. You install them from the command line or from the from the software center that we showed you before. It's incredibly easy to install a graphical thing, but you also have the command line you can do that from. If you are familiar with it, you're used to doing that kind of thing day in and day out on a server, you can leverage all that information to make your desktop experience all that much better. It's Linux is also really convenient for developers. Like there's a ton of IDEs, software development kits, and anything you could think of for development. It's just an incredibly convenient system for development. So there's that also. It's excellent for developers. Not going to expand on that a whole lot more, but if you're, it just takes getting used to like anything else. But let's take a quick look at some of the features of KDE. Now, your experience on Linux is going to be different depending on whether you're using GNOME, KDE, Cinnamon, XFCE, or any number of a long list of graphical desktop environments that you can install on Linux, and your whole desktop experience is completely going to change depending on which desktop environment you have installed. So let's take a look at some of the things you can do, and there are a lot more shortcuts and effects that I'm not going to show you today, but just to give you an idea of what you can do. Right now I have multiple desktops installed, or multiple virtual desktops, and this feature exists in Linux. Linux has had this for many years, and older Unix operating systems have had this for even longer than that, I believe. But Windows and Mac OS also have this functionality, but they were both late to the party. Mac OS and Windows were extremely late to the party implementing this functionality, and I don't feel like either of them has done as good of a job. They're not bad, but they're not as good as what's available for Linux. So, for example, I can say Control F8, and you'll see I have a whole bunch of that. This shows all of my. I have 6 virtual desktops, so I could jump over to, say, for example, this desktop over here, or I could use if I say Alt Control Arrow, I can use the arrow keys to jump between different desktops like that. So you can, and it basically looks like a kind of like a 3D thing that just sort of flips. So you can jump between your desktops like that. Control F8, you can just view everything that you have, and just click on what you want to use. And you'll notice down in the corner here, there's this little map of what desktops you have. It's a little bit small to click on. You could make it bigger. You can basically like click on which desktop you want, and it will just bring you there. So that's incredibly convenient also. It's like if you look, I don't even have a lot of stuff running, but everything's organized by everything here is organized by desktop. So I have everything related to like web development on one desktop, everything developed for research on another desktop, everything for the video I'm recording right now on yet another desktop over here in the corner. So if you have a lot of windows open, this is really convenient, and it works better than Windows, and better than Windows, and better than Mac OS. I think Mac OS is pretty slick. Windows isn't too bad, but this beats both of them, I think. You could say Control F9 and see all of the windows on my current desktop, or I could say Control F10 and see all the windows from every desktop there is on my entire system. So that's another excellent feature that I don't use very often. I find myself using this feature a lot, but not this. It's the type of thing you think you would use a lot, but I don't find myself using it as much. I definitely switch between desktops a lot. I make heavy use of that, and once you start doing that, it's something that just makes you a whole lot more productive. I'm more productive of a desktop user on Linux than I am on Mac OS or Windows. And sure, you can learn your shortcuts on any of those operating systems, but it's just a bit easier on. I think having worked with all of them, I find Linux just I'm more productive with it. And maybe I am biased a little bit, but only so much. I think Linux legitimately is a really excellent system that will save you. It's all up to you though. Pick what works best for you. If you're very comfortable in either Windows or a Mac environment and you don't feel like experimenting, then that's fine too. There's no wrong choice. Just whatever you prefer or whatever works for you. I could see having a preference for another system also, as most people do. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover for today, I think. Just to give people some perspective and just to take it from that angle. So hopefully you at least found this video interesting, if nothing else. You want to hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment down below. We want to know what you think. Probably going to want to subscribe for more videos like this. Usually we do more technical things and show you how to do things. But that's pretty much it for today. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.